A billion years. We are about to take the step out of matter. It's only going to get weirder. The level of contradiction is going to rise excruciatingly, even beyond the excruciating present levels of contradiction. I think it's just going to get weirder and weirder and weirder, and finally it's going to be so weird that people are going to have to talk about how weird it is. Eventually people are going to say, what the hell is going on? It's just too nuts. It's not enough to say it's nuts. You have to explain why it's so nuts. It is under the sway of what I call the transcendental object at the end of time. The planet is on a collision course with the most profound event it's possible to imagine, the freeing of organic life from the chrysalis of matter. For a billion years there's been life on this planet, but never life that could step outside of matter. But this is obviously what's in the cards. Processes are now in play which so totally rewrite the script that no one can imagine.
He predicted everything. And when you realize this interview was filmed back in 1998, it's downright astonishing. In those quiet moments on tape, he laid out ideas that perfectly foresaw how our everyday lives would spiral into chaos. Month after month, year after year, things keep getting weirder and we all notice it. And if everything he predicted comes true, it'll only get weirder. But his explanation now makes perfect sense. This is one of my favorite talks because just when you think it's a relic of the past, you see that what he said is exactly what we live every day. It's truly eye-opening.
So what we have here is a new model of time based on a very real intuition that I think most people share, which is that time is speeding up, that human beings are part of that process, and that the culmination of that process is now within the ven of historical time. Whether you believe, as I do, that we can know the precise moment of this transformation of the world of time, or whether you believe it is simply coming soon and fast, really doesn't make that much difference. We are all gathered here at the end game of developmental processes on this planet. We are about to become unrecognizable to ourselves as a species. Our technologies, our religions, our science has pushed us toward this for thousands of years without us awakening to what the denouement would be. Now we stand close enough to it that I think all but the most lumpen among us must feel the tug of the transcendental and the transformative.
Time isn't just marching on, it seems to be sprinting. Think about it. Back when everything was slower, a day might have felt long and full of possibilities. Now each second is crammed with changes, challenges, and breakthroughs, as if the clock's hand are blurred by the sheer rush of events unfolding around us. It's like the universe turned the dial up to 11. Every moment feels loaded with a world of activity and possibility that we can barely keep up with. And that's exactly where things start to get wild. Just when you think you've grasped the pace, the surprise is lurking around the corner. Ready or not, we're about to see what happens when this race against time spills over into something even more extraordinary.
I am very perplexed when you say that time is speeding up. As far as I can tell, such things as crystal oscillators, things which keep time, clocks, the relationship of the Earth turning to the calendar, the full moon, all of the things which are symptoms of our passage through time, don't seem to be throwing themselves out of kilter. So how do you really mean about time speeding up?
Well, let me answer in the form of a question. Which lasts longer? A million years in which nothing happens, or 10 seconds with 50,000 events crammed into it?
So, what moves faster? Right? Time now is not moving faster, guys. Time now is not moving faster. That's what he's saying.
Which lasts longer? A million years in which nothing happens, or 10 seconds with 50,000 events crammed into it?
Exactly. So when he asked this question, it's because it's actually such a stupid question when in reality it's the inverse, like, understanding you need to have.
Out of kilter. So how do you really mean
So how do you really mean
about time
about
speeding up?
time
Well,
speeding
let me
up?
answer
Well, let me answer
in the form of a question. Which lasts
Which
longer?
lasts
A
longer?
million
A
years in
million
which
years in
nothing
which nothing
happens,
happens,
or 10
or 10
seconds with
seconds where
50,000 events crammed
50,000
into it?
events crammed into
What
it?
I mean
What I
really is
mean
that
really
more
is
and
that
more is
more and more
happening.
is happening.
More and more is
More and
happening.
more is
And
happening.
if you ask the
And if you
question, well,
ask
what would be the
what
ultimate
would be all the
state of
ultimate state of
connectivity or of happening? It's
connectivity
when
of
all
happening?
points are connected to all other points. Somehow this concept of connectivity is intimately linked to the concept of
Oh,
complexity.
I needed that picture for the thumbnail.
And so really what I'm saying is that the universe is getting its act together. It's connecting the dots. It's
Connecting the
bringing
dots.
everything into co-relationship with everything else. And
Let's go,
somehow it
boys.
does this through the production of consciousness. Consciousness is this integrative function in biology which takes data which may appear profoundly unrelated,
Okay,
and in
can I see? I
fact
can't
brings
say
it
that.
into some
Data.
kind of a
Data.
congruent relationship. We say an organism coordinates a point of view. Well, in a way, what's happening over time is that the universe is coordinating a point of view. And as it does this, it becomes somehow more aware, more self-conscious, more being-like and less thing-like. And as I said, this process is not proceeding at a steady pace. It's proceeding faster and faster. More connectivity occurs now in a calendar year than occurred in 1,000,000 years, 1,000,000,000 years ago.
This makes so much sense. Our familiar timekeepers, clocks, calendars, the Earth's rotation haven't changed at all. Yet our experience of time feels radically different. As we mature, we all sense that time is speeding up. But it's not just a trick of aging. Today, every moment is jam-packed with events. And it's not just mundane stuff like to-do lists. It's real, world-shaking events. Look at the past 5 years. Just imagine where we'll be in 5, 10, or even 50 years. It's overwhelming, to say the least. And here's where it really gets interesting. While it might seem like he's simply talking about time running faster, he's actually hinting at something even more profound.
He's not hinting at time going faster, guys. That's not where he's at. He asked the question.
Filter. So how do you really mean about time speeding up?
Well, let me answer in the form of a question. Which lasts longer? 1,000,000 years in which nothing happens, or 10 seconds with 50,000 events crammed into it?
It's always set to the perspective of the organisms, or what is consciousness and what can be perceived or like observed. So if we have like an observer here, right? We could maybe use the Big Bang. So when we are at a singular point, right? We are at a singular point. Everything in the world is this, right? You're here, and everything is crammed into this area, right? You are this. You are this. This is you. So the world expanding around you, if it tomorrow, right, or in a year or whatever, I would say it would accelerate in some fashion right here to expand outwards. It would need to expand outwards, this thing in the middle. It expands the universe. It's a big explosion, right? Big explosion. Explosion of the universe. The Big Bang. Bang, bang. Big Bang. So, if you were an observer at this point, you're standing right in here. This is you. Oh. Like, you would need to connect with dots before you can, like, expand, right? So, in this moment, there's only... Is it even hydrogen? It's quarks, right? And gluons and whatnot. It goes... It's in here. It's you. And you believe, oh, okay, you're small. You can move pretty fast, right? Like like in our time, we don't even recognize it, how fast time is moving. So how fast they're moving, like it's almost unmeasurable for us, but we have been able to do it. So at this point, these guys, there are only these guys in the universe, right? So they need to connect with each other, figure out how to form. So they expand and then figure out what happens and then figure out what happens. So this actually time doesn't move that fast at this point, I would say. It moves fast, but if I was a thing in here, I would say, time's just moving, right? So when we get bigger and we get out and the universe settles a bit, right? Some of the hydrogen atoms, they go and figure out stuff. They have fun. And they get into molecules and then they settle around stars and whatnot. But I guess that thing I'm talking about stars, right? That's maybe in this time frame, right? So compared, if we're at this time frame, maybe we're even further out. But imagine when we're looking back as an observer from this point and looking back at that, and we need to figure out and we need to do stuff, right? We need to get through every day. And we need to connect with stuff, and time just moves, right? But due to the calculations, like what we're doing, right? These things, they get bigger and bigger, and at some point they settle and they do not it. Maybe that's another point. Right? But it exists in different states of time, different frequencies. So we can say that of the time went faster back here, right? If yes, of course, if we were standing there, if we were, but as these gluons, as all these things, right? How do they exist in the time today? Right? They're just seamless, right? But back then they were only thing, and they weren't seamless. They were communicating a lot with each other in order to like stabilize in some kind of way in finding if we're talking about gluons and morphic resonance, these gluons and stuff, they just they have a lot of fun. I don't know what that means. We could check it out. But my imagination tells me that it took a lot of time for these things to come together to figure out for them in their time frame how to figure out stuff. Just like us in our time frame as humans, it takes a lot of time, right? And that's why I think even the humans who lived like maybe this is the humans right time frame or something. But if we look at the early humans, right? Every day, if there are no events, no actions happening, and you're only your own crew, right? Just like the animals. How many conscious decisions do you even have to make a minute, right? Like consciousness makes uh, time move, I would say. So when we're out here, time moves like it seems very fast for us, I would say, right? But it would seem even slower or faster for these guys. Relativity, then it would mean they yeah, that we would be in a standstill. It's just like more information crammed in. So you like pace, speed of time is a different is not the why right way of thinking about it. It's how much information we can generate or like identify, and from that correlate, constellate uh, with all previous information stored or uh, yeah perceived. Because when it is perceived and when it's uttered, it is there's a memory formed and there's a connectivity to that. Let's see. So time is not moving faster. Like back at this time, there was still like thousands of things happening, right? And we say maybe it happened in 10 in the minus. This was 10 in the minus. Was it e to the power of I don't know 27 or something seconds. I don't know. Right. Like from here going to here or here, it's 10 to the like it's a snap, right? But if you were at this point, you would need to do a lot of constellation, a lot of connection with all the other people around. Figure out what's going on. Can we figure out how to become molecules? Right? Oh, can we become a gluon? That would be so nice, right? Oh, we're the gluons. Oh, can we figure out how to do stuff? Oh, shit. Oh yeah, we can work together and we can work together. Oh, and if there's a G and oh yeah, that's fine and dandy. And then we got the first particles, right? The hydro. No, then we get the protons, right? Oh, and then we get this stuff out here, right? And it's, but that's not a bigger scale, right? And then we have molecules, hydrogen, helium. Then we get this thing out here. So time is only, it's dependent of the observer and the consciousness, which is what's it called? Measuring units. Right? We're measuring, we figure out how we can incorporate. So But these guys, right? Hydrogen, hydrogen, helium atoms. They are what are they? These guys, right? It's crazy. These guys get together, right? And form this shit. Which is what is it he's saying? I think it is it a proton? I think it seems like it could come out of nothing, right? So these things, they've actually figured out a way how to stabilize in their relationship and how to like assist the next level. So this here, it can do the same thing, right? It will always be like stable. They will always have their no, basically, it will always keep its maintenance. It will always be balanced. These states, these are balanced states. These have reached equilibrium state. Equilibrium state. Right. So this is a state of equilibrium where it can keep on replicating itself in some way. I would think in some kind of way. Oh, mm. So these guys are in a state of equilibrium, right? They have reached a state of equilibrium where it will always seek to balance itself out, right? It will always. Uh, is it light or was it? What is it? Because there is also they reach a state of equilibrium. These guys at this point, I would say. Right? And we can only look back and we only know what happens, and they've reached these kind of equilibriums. How do they form stars, right? These guys, they get together, right? With electrons, and they just like smash and they smash, and they reach a state of equilibrium where it can create life, right? So that's how. So this that it can expand to the next level, drawn from not data, but like the connection through the empty space that is. So when we look at how plants form, right? Just as the hydrogen atom has been what gave life, right? Maybe there was a little bit of light in here that could be spread, and then there was a little bit of light in here that could be spread. So what is light? Maybe that's relationship? I don't know. Love, light, relationship. Figuring out how we can stabilize each other out. So here it stabilizes as it gains into the sun, or the kind of, you know, stage which have reached equilibrium, where it can spread its energy out to the rest, so it does not need to think about it, just to lay our hands down, so that one day we can become seed. So we have like the planets getting formed, right? And from all of this, they have like gases and stuff, right? Which get together and form water. It just keeps exploding. It just keeps exploding until it can reach it like a state of equilibrium. All right. So actually with the plants there's a lot of time where nothing happens. And also with the hydrogen there are a lot of times when nothing happens, and then it gets to the next stage, and then it gets to the next stage, through the cycles, through the circles, through the black holes. And like on Earth we're like, this is actually not even, like we should be out here or something. Because we need to time this up by 10, and this is even not. So but these things, they're still here. These things, they're still here. These things, they're still here. But it they come to a realization where they figure out where they can use the previous states in their. And with these guys, how do they figure out how they can? But that's, they make water, right? And they give to the black holes. Uh, so this happens, and there's a dust. There's dust around these suns about for 1 billion years after the Big Bang. That's only doubly as much as this. But still 10 times. We're in 10x. And then this would be 100x. These numbers are far from right, right? But there's a representation of to imagine how the universe, it gets together. Alright, so this saves that. Yep, look at this. Alright, I already heard this, so I'm going with smoke.
What I mean really is that more and more is happening.
I'll be listening
More
to
and
this,
more
but
is
I already listened
happening.
to it once.
And if you ask the question, well, what would be the ultimate state of connectivity or of happening? It's when all points are connected to all other points. Somehow this concept of connectivity is intimately linked to the concept of complexity. And so really what I'm saying is that the universe is getting its act together. It's connecting the dots. It's bringing everything into co-relationship with everything else. And somehow it does this through the production of consciousness. Consciousness is this integrative function in biology which takes data which may appear profoundly unrelated, and in fact brings it into some kind of a congruent relationship. We say an organism coordinates a point of view. Well, in a way, what's happening over time is that the universe is coordinating a point of view. And as it does this, it becomes somehow more aware, more self-conscious, more being-like and less thing-like. And as I said, this process is not proceeding at a steady pace. It's proceeding faster and faster. More connectivity occurs now in a calendar year than occurred in 1,000,000 years, 1,000,000,000 years ago.
This makes so much sense. Our familiar timekeepers, clocks, calendars, the Earth's rotation haven't changed at all. Yet our experience of time feels radically different. As we mature, we all sense that time is speeding up. But it's not just a trick of aging. Today, every moment is jam-packed with events. And it's not just mundane stuff like to-do lists. It's real, world-shaking events. Look at the past 5 years. Just imagine where we'll be in 5, 10, or even 50 years. It's overwhelming, to say the least. And here's where it really gets interesting. While it might seem like he's simply talking about time running faster, he's actually hinting at something even more profound. A kind of ultimate climax or eschaton that's yet to unfold. If you think you've wrapped your head around just how fast things are changing right now, just wait until we dig even deeper into what he's saying later. This is one of the most eye-opening interviews I've ever listened to. It doesn't just make you think about the passing of time, it challenges you to imagine a future where everything as we know it is about to be completely transformed.
A really common, ordinary way to describe the times that we're living in is that they're very, very chaotic, filled with acts of unspeakable evil, and at the same time, there's this sort of buzz and thrust of optimism. Everything from a guy like Peter Schwartz talking about the long wave, the big booming economy, breakthroughs in educational levels and qualities of life. But it's definitely a dynamic where you've got extremes of good and evil in that way. Would you talk a little bit about the relationship between that dynamic as we go forward and the novelty continues to climax?
Well, novelty is not necessarily good or nice. Novelty is complex. That's what it is. And so I see really a concatenation of tendencies and forces here at the end, it's only going to get weirder. The level of contradiction is going to rise excruciatingly, even beyond the excruciating present levels of contradiction. I think it's just going to get weirder and weirder and weirder, and finally it's going to be so weird that people are going to have to talk about how weird it is. And at that point, novelty theory can come out of the woods, because eventually people are going to say, what the hell is going on? It's just too nuts. It's not enough to say it's nuts. You have to explain why it's so nuts. I look for the invention of artificial life, the cloning of human beings, possible contact with extraterrestrials, possible human immortality, and at the same time, appalling acts of brutality, genocide, race baiting, homophobia, famine, starvation, because the systems which are in place to keep the world sane are utterly inadequate to the forces that have been unleashed. The collapse of the socialist world, the rise of the internet, these are changes so immense, nobody could imagine them ever happening. And now that they have happened, nobody even bothers to mention what a big deal it is. The fact that there is no such thing as the Soviet Union, people never talk about it anymore. But when I was a kid, the notion that that would ever change was beyond conceiving. So the good news is that as primates, we're incredibly adaptable to change. Put us in a desert, we survive. Put us in the jungle, we survive. We can put up with about anything, and it's a good thing because we're going to be tested to the limits.
Think of our current times as a storm of extremes. On one hand, there's undeniable chaos, acts of cruelty, violence, and things that shake us to our core. On the other hand, there's a palpable surge of hope, breakthrough innovations, improved education, economic booms, and the promise of a brighter future. It might seem like these forces are at odds, but they're actually two sides of the same coin. What he's pointing out is that this mix of overwhelming challenges and exhilarating progress isn't random. Instead, it's part of a larger process. As more events and experiences pile up, the universe itself seems to be nudging us towards a major transformation. In simple terms, the very chaos we witness is setting the stage for a powerful shift, a tipping point that will redefine how we live and connect with one another. This tension between dark and light, disruption and renewal, is exactly what might propel us into a new era. And that's the big question. How will these opposing forces shape our future?
I want to go to this stuff about the strange attractor at the end of history.
Right.
Never ever, considered that notion that we are being pulled as opposed to simply just going on forever and ever. And that's for sure something that people are going to go, huh?
What the universe is doing is it is under the sway of what I call the transcendental object at the end of time. And that is this domain of hyperconnectivity, that it would be perfect novelty. And all nature aspires for this state of perfect novelty. You could almost say that nature abhors habit, and so it seeks the novel by producing various kinds of phenomena at every level in biology, chemistry, and society. And so there really is a purpose to the universe. Its purpose is this state of hypercomplexification in which all of its points become related to each other, become what mathematicians call cotangent. And it gives the universe the feeling of being imbued with a caring presence. It makes it appear as though nature is tending toward something, and it changes our own ethical and moral position in the universe, because science tells us that we're the products of a cosmic accident. We're at the edge of an ordinary galaxy in an ordinary star system, and we're damn lucky to be here. And that's it. That's our place, a very existential notion of our place in the cosmos. The purpose of being a human is to complexify reality even more, to hand on a more diverse, more complicated, more multifaceted universe to our children. And when this process of complexification reaches the omega point, it will fulfill, I believe, the expectations of all of these religions, but it will fulfill it in a mature, scientific, and universal way.
Now hold on a moment. He talks about the process of complexification, how everything in our world becomes more intricate and connected over time until it all converges into one grand unified state. Imagine starting with something simple, like a single cell. Over time, that cell replicates and forms a complex organism. Now scale that idea up. As individual events, ideas, and people connect more deeply, our society becomes an enormous network, a living, breathing web of relationships and data. From a scientific perspective, think of it like a network that grows more interconnected with every new link, eventually reaching a point where every node is linked to every other node. It's the same way our understanding of the universe evolved, from simple particles to the vast complexity of life and consciousness as we see it today. Now, if we look at it from a more spiritual or symbolic viewpoint, there's a striking parallel to biblical imagery. Consider Revelation 21:4, which he says, "He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying of pain, for the old order of things has passed away." This passage speaks of an end, an ultimate transformation, where everything that came before is redefined, much like his idea of reaching the omega point. That is, the culminating moment when all complexity and connectivity converge into a new transcendent state. In short, our world is in a constant process of building up, layer upon layer of complexity that will eventually lead us to an ultimate transformation. Whether seen through the lens of science, technology, or spirituality, the message is clear. We're hurtling towards a moment when the accumulated change reaches a tipping point, rewriting the rules of existence as we know them. And if you think that's wild now, just wait until we explore what this means for our future.
But several factors are on the horizon which I think can be brought together to sort of get a picture of what we're headed toward. One is for some time now, we've been involved in building complex prostheses, which we call machines and computers. They are part of us. We don't perceive them as part of us because we identify with the flesh and exteriorize the fabricated metal. But in fact, they are a part of us as much as our political systems, our agriculture production systems, so forth and so on. So we are extending ourselves through the machines. Well, one of the things that these machines do is they're time compressors. You and I sitting here talking are operating at about 100 hertz. If we could be magically downloaded into a top-of-the-line computer, we would run at 800 megahertz. That means we could do 800 million more things in this moment than we can do when we're wearing flesh. So it may be that we will find a way to technologically stretch time, and this will become for us like a false eternity. You may have only 10 minutes left in your life, but it may be time enough to pack in all of human history from the fall of Rome to the present moment. So we are finding ways out of the three-dimensional Newtonian prison, which says, life is narrow and confined and ends at the grave. And we're doing it by becoming information that is freed from material. And somehow this allows us to make this ascent to the next dimensional modality. Information is not time and space constrained the way we are. We talk about the difficulty of moving an object at the speed of light. Our entire planetary technology cannot achieve moving a marble at the speed of light, but we can move information at the speed of light, tetrabytes of it. We do this every day. We are about to take the step out of matter. The planet is on a collision course with the most profound event it's possible to imagine, the freeing of organic life from the chrysalis of matter. For 1 billion years there's been life on this planet, but never life that could step outside of matter. But this is obviously what's in the cards, and we are privileged to be central to that event.
We're on the brink of stepping beyond the physical confines of our existence. For centuries, our lives have revolved around tangible matter, our bodies, the weight of our objects, the slow march of physical processes. But everything is changing. Today, information travels at the speed of light, and our technology is beginning to free that information from its material chain. Our world is no longer limited by the traditional three-dimensional space that once defined us. Instead, we're moving toward a future where our ideas, memories, and even aspects of our consciousness can exist in a digital, almost limitless realm. Science supports this vision. The faster we process and exchange information, the more we blur the line between the physical and the virtual. Our digital devices, acting as extensions of ourselves, are already transforming how we interact with the world. And as these advancements continue, the constraints that once held us back, gravity, inertia, the slow pace of biological time, may soon become relics of the past. But stop for a moment. Is this really the world we're headed toward? Consider Elon Musk's Neuralink, the ubiquity of ChatGPT, and the constant chatter about AI this and AI that. Do we ever pause to ask, where will we be in the next 50 years? Unlike his "Can you imagine the world in 500 years" challenge, which is nearly impossible to fathom, we're forced to confront that everything is not only speeding up, but accelerating into an even more chaotic, unpredictable future. And honestly, that's pretty scary. These times are unsettling. The relentless pace of change can feel overwhelming, as if there's no escape from the rapid surge of technology and transformation. Yet, if everything he describes as the unfolding will of the universe, or God, maybe this acceleration is exactly how it's meant to be. I don't have all the answers. All I know is this. We're hurtling towards a future where the old rules no longer apply, and that future is both thrilling and daunting. It challenges us to keep questioning and seeking meaning in a world where change is the only constant.
So the whole entire Milky Way galaxy is a being?
Well, it's an organism, yes. The galaxy is a kind of an organism. You can think of it as a fractal resonance with a cell. The galaxy has a nucleus of very dense material where very mysterious processes are going on. Then it has a cytoplasmic envelope of stars and gas clouds that surround that core. And then it is an individual, very distinctly defined by the vast emptiness that lies between it and the next galaxy. Every star is a data point in an enormous computer simulation of the novelty wave. That's why it has that spiral structure. You know, scientists are very puzzled that the galaxies don't fly apart. They don't seem to have enough mass that their gravitation should hold them together. And there's been a lot of talk about dark matter or some missing factor. Well, the missing factor is novelty. The galaxy stays together because the galaxy wants to be a galaxy. So everything organizes itself fractally, spirally, with a dense center in its spatial domain and a dense center in its temporal domain. We are like this. Galaxies are like this. Planets, stars, bird flocks, coral reefs. But in the case of the galaxy, it's particularly easy to observe the structure because the thing is so huge that its forces dominate and damp out other forces which might distort it.
Time's not just flying, it's sprinting. Days blur, news cycles spin, and every hour packs in what used to take years. Clocks haven't changed, but we have. Life's getting louder, faster, weirder, and yeah, it's exhausting. But here's the twist. This chaos isn't random. It's the universe tightening its grip, pulling us towards a breakthrough. Think of it like a storm. Storms aren't here to wreck things. They're here to clear the air. Right now, everything feels upside down. Old systems crumble, new ideas clash, and the future is a blur. But hidden in this mess is a pattern. More people connecting, more ideas colliding, more possibility. It's like the world's building a puzzle we can't see yet, and every piece, even the scary ones, snap us closer to the finish. We're built for this. Humans adapt. We've survived ice ages, wars, pandemics. Now, we're facing a different kind of test, keeping up with a world that won't stop changing. The endpoint? A world so connected, so alive with collaboration, that the old limits, time, distance, even difference, start to melt. Not because machines take over, but because we finally wake up to how powerful we are together.
Giordano Bruno asks us to lift our gaze from our daily urgencies to something far taller, the heroic soul straining toward perfection, the comprehension of a world already infinitely perfect, and a union with the source from which that world pours. An intellect that is beauty itself and goodness itself, waiting to be loved back. Picture two currents running through every human heart. The first is common, vulgar, satisfied to take whatever sensation arrives and to call that living. The second is heroic, a clear stream that will not rest until it joins its headwaters in God. Bruno, following Plato and Aristotle, warns that when the lower current tries to drown the higher, disorder blooms in universities, in churches, and in the private chambers of the mind. Pedantry replaces wisdom, appetite overthrows reason, and the whole grand melody of existence collapses into noise. He warns too that life is full of contraries and paradoxes. Birth and decay, pleasure and bitterness, union and separation. Each is the hinge on which its opposite turns. The unthinking are content inside this seesaw, but the heroic soul feels the torment of wanting what is absent, of fearing what is possible, of refusing to sleep inside contentment. Heroic love is pain precisely because it will not curl up inside the present moment. It wants the infinite. The finite is never enough. Yet once the mind sees that good and evil are relative flashes, that both fade like morning vapor, it can stand in the middle of change untouched. Pleasure ceases to intoxicate, pain ceases to terrify, and mutability becomes as insubstantial as a dream remembered at noon. Most souls, Bruno says, ride a wheel that lifts them high and drops them low through endless cycles of becoming. A few, the daring few, step off that wheel by fusing with eternal mind. These fortunate ones watch every apparent evil ripen into good. Suffering turns to splendor. Death in one age becomes life in all others. But inspiration comes in two varieties. One kind is blind, a house swept clean so that any passing spirit can move the furniture, perform a miracle, vanish, and leave the host no wiser. The other kind is conscious fire. It begins in a mind already luminous, already practiced in contemplation. Divine fervor fans that native spark until the person speaks and acts not as a harp strummed from outside, but as a composer of new music. The first is dignified the way an ass that carries the sacraments is dignified. The second is sacred in itself. Climbing toward excellence is like walking from night toward noon. First we turn toward the faintest hint of dawn, then shadows, then colors from black through violet up to white, then the gleam of polished stone, then the outflowing rays, and at last the sun. That first turn feels like grace, yet Bruno says it is affinity. The sunflower bends toward the sun because light was already folded inside its seed. The human seed is love, whose emblem is fire. Love converts its object into itself, and the heroic soul will rest only when it burns with the same beauty it worships. Three kinds of love divide the world. One sees a beautiful body and climbs through that window to the beauty of spirit and the beauty of God. One stops at the window and is content to admire the reflection. A third remains in the street, gaping at the glass and craving the pleasure it promises. Only the first is truly heroic. Corresponding to those loves are two beauties. Corporeal beauty is the harmony of shape and hue, but it changes, decays, and cannot anchor permanent love. Reason, therefore, turns toward the soul that shaped the body. Intellect climbs higher still to the intelligence that shaped the soul. There it meets the captain of all forms, who steals every thought soldier for battle and lifts them past lesser goods. Even that blazing intelligence is not yet God, but only the highest idea. God remains behind a veil. We feed on images until cleaner eyes may drink the source face to face. Perfection then is a way of knowing. We become one with the thought system that originates in the mind of God. The object is bottomless, so completion is impossible, yet every honest stride counts. The generous spirit would rather fall while reaching for the summit than triumph on a molehill. Actaeon in Bruno's myth hunts divine wisdom like a stag. When he finds it, the hounds of his own thoughts tear away his old nature, and he is reborn as the very quarry he pursued. The quest never ends. Whatever truth the mind seizes, it finds measured and therefore yearns beyond it. Yet the journey is not a ladder from bad to good, it is a circle, each rung containing the infinite center in miniature. Good itself is a perfective infinite, pouring itself without limit, yet always according to the vessel that receives it. Drink, and the spring spreads further. Union with that source is timeless. The moment of awakening holds the whole of eternity. Still, even the heroic soul lives on a frontier. Part of it soars toward the intelligible world, part sinks toward sense. Body is in change, and change clouds the sight of immutable truth. No stable beauty can be painted on pupils that are water one instant, vapor the next. Contraries invade the generous soul as well. Torment couched in content, death braided with unspeakable joy. The Kabbalist's kiss of death is simultaneously an entrance into endless life. The higher the knowledge, the deeper the passion that dissolves lesser pains. Regulus on the rack, Lucretia with the dagger, Socrates lifting the hemlock cup. Each proves that a mind possessed by a greater brightness goes blind to immediate hurt. And the road is inward. To meet God, you do not raise your arms to the sky. You descend into the quiet chamber of your own mind, where the divine is nearer than your pulse. The heroic soul steps back from the crowd in concentration, associating only with those who sharpen or are sharpened. Its shield is an invincible equilibrium, forged by knowing both the height and the depth of things. Love fuels the whole ascent because love is God's essence. To love God is already to be loved, for the divine light withdraws or advances only as we turn from it or to it. Argument about God shrinks him. Only love widens the aperture. The supreme truth flashes in whole in an instant. No syllabus, no ladder of proofs. When that flash fills the soul, thought ceases to grope and becomes one blaze of simplicity. This is the vision of Bruno. Listen for the echo of that flash in your moments of silence. Feel the tension between the cage of flesh and the wings of mind. Sense the ember of heroic love asking to be fanned and multiplied. I am Irevelato. I reveal the secrets you deserve to know, the lives and stories of gods and luminaries. If this spark has stirred you, speak in the comments, share the fire and help draw other restless hearts to the climb. What follows is a narration of Giordano Bruno by J. Lewis McIntyre, Part 2, Philosophy of Bruno, Chapter 7, The Higher Life. Ready your listening, brace your spirit, the ascent begins now. We now turn to the higher moral life, which is at the same time the religious life of the heroic soul in its struggle towards perfection. This perfection consists in comprehension of the world as infinitely perfect, in the union with God as the source from which the world flows, the spirit in which it lives, and in the love of God as at once infinite beauty and infinite goodness. We have seen that there are to Bruno, as to Plato and to Aristotle, two classes of men, the vulgar and the heroic, the lower or subject and the upper or ruling classes. As in each of us there are two principles, a higher intellect or reason or mind, and a lower sense and sensual passion. The danger is as great to the world when the lower class attempts to usurp the place of the higher, as it is to the individual soul when passion overwhelms reason. The spread of pedantry in the universities and in the churches, greater in his time and more menacing to human progress than it had ever been, was an illustration to Bruno's eye of the results ensuing when lower minds tampered with divine knowledge. The heroic soul is raised by the divine spirit within it, out of the turmoil of the constant change and vicissitude to which the vulgar soul is, in common with all living things, subjected. The beginning, middle and end, birth, growth and perfection of all earthly things are from contraries, through contraries, in contraries and to contraries. And where there is contrariety, there is also action, reaction, movement, diversity, multitude, order, degrees, succession, change. There is never any pleasure, we read elsewhere, without some bitterness. Nay, if there were not the bitter in things, there would not be the pleasurable. For fatigue makes us to find pleasure in repose. Separation causes us to find joy in union. And so everywhere we find that one contrary is the reason of another being desired and pleasing. And so it is with pain. None, therefore, are ever satisfied with their state, except the unfeeling or the foolish who have no knowledge of their own ill, but enjoy the present without fear of the future, can find rest in what is, and have no feeling or desire for what might be. In short, have no sense of contrariety, which is figured by the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Ignorance is the mother of sensual happiness and joy. Hence, the heroic love, in its beginning, is a torment. For it does not rest in the present, as does sensual love, but feels ambition, emulation, suspicious fear for the future, the absent, the contrary. Yet the wise man is neither happy nor miserable, knowing that good and evil are alike relative, alike fading and temporary things. He is neither dismayed nor elated, but becomes continent in his inclinations and temperate in his pleasures. Pleasure is not really pleasure to him, for he has present to him its ceasing. Pain is not pain, for he has by force of thought its termination before him. All mutable things, therefore, are to him as things that are not. Owing to the ever-moving cycle of change, the ordinary soul must of necessity fall back, in the course of the eternal process of its life, to the lowest stage, however high in the scale it may have risen. But this, although an evil for it, does not prejudice the whole, in which all things work together for good. Some few, however, may escape this danger through becoming united with the eternal mind or source. They then cease to be subject to mutation, mind being immutable, and persist in eternal blessedness and love. For such favored ones of heaven, the greatest evils of this life are converted into goods, correspondingly great. It is suffering that compels the labor and the striving which lead most frequently to the glory of immortal splendor. Death in one age makes to live in all others. There are, however, two kinds of furore, or inspiration. In some there is only blindness, stupidity, unreasoning impulse. Others consist in a certain divine abstraction by which some men become better, in fact, than ordinary men. These again are of two kinds, for some becoming the habitation of gods or of divine spirits, say or do miraculous things without themselves or others understanding the reason. These for the most part are promoted to this state from one of rudeness and ignorance. The divine sense and spirit enters into them as into a house swept and garnished, they being void of any spirit or sense of their own. Others being more habituated to or skilled in contemplation, and having innate in them a lucid and intellectual spirit, are moved by an internal impulse and natural fervor with love of divinity, justice, truth, glory. By the fire of desire, fanned by the breath of purpose, they give edge to their senses, and in the sulphur of the thinking faculty enkindle the light of reason, by which they see further than ordinary men. These come in the end to speak and operate, not as vases or instruments, but as principal artificers and agents. The first have worth or dignity, the second are worthy, or the first are worthy as an ass that carries the sacraments, the second as a sacred thing. In the first we see divinity in effect. We admire, adore, obey it. In the second, we see the excellence of our own humanity. The steps towards the highest peak of human excellence are compared, after Neoplatonist example, to the degrees in intensity of light as we proceed from darkness, in which it is entirely absent, to shadow, then to the colors in their order from black to white, next to the brightness diffused from polished or transparent bodies, the rays outflowing from the sun, finally to the sun itself, in which light is most truly and most vividly itself. First of all, it is needful for the soul to turn to the light, by act of conversion to present the light of intelligence to its eyes, so to regain its lost virtue, to strengthen its sinews, to terrify and put to rout its enemies, the lower sense feelings and passions. The conversion seems to arise as by an act of grace from above, or, to express this in other words, the soul or spirit tends towards that with which it has a greatest affinity, as the sunflower tends towards the sun. And this affinity in the human soul is love. The symbol of love is fire, for love converts the object of love into the lover, as fire is of all elements the most active, the most potent to transform others into itself. It is the divine in man that makes him or impels him to love God as he is in reality. And the goal or aim of that love is to take God into himself, to become one with God. No really divine or heroic love can ever rest satisfied in anything but spiritual beauty. For there are three kinds of love, as there are three kinds of platonic rapture: the contemplative, the practical, the idle, or voluptuous. One, from the perception of corporeal form and beauty, rises to the thought of the spiritual and divine. Another enjoys the vision of beauty for itself, and for the grace of the spirit that is reflected in the grace of the body, while still another enjoys only the material pleasure that beauty provides. The last is the love of barbarous natures, incapable of raising themselves to love that which is really worthy of love. To the two higher kinds of love correspond the two kinds of beauty, sensible and intelligible. That in the body which calls forth love, its beauty, is a certain spirituality, which consists not in definite dimensions, nor in determinate colors or forms, but in a certain harmony and consonance of members and colors. Corporeal beauty is not, however, true or permanent beauty, and therefore cannot call forth true or permanent love. The beauty of bodies is accidental, shadowy, and like other qualities is absorbed, altered, and decays through the change of the subject body, for the latter, frequently from beautiful, becomes ugly, without any change taking place in the soul. Reason, however, apprehends the more truly beautiful by conversion to that which makes beauty in body the source of the beauty, and that is the soul, which has so moulded and formed it. Intellect rises still higher, sees that while the soul is incomparably beautiful above the beauty of bodily things, it is not beautiful in itself, or primitively. Otherwise there could not exist the diversity that is found in souls, some being wise, lovable, beautiful, others foolish, hateful, ugly. Hence it must rise to that higher intelligence which of itself is beautiful, and of itself is good. That is the one, the supreme captain, who when presented to the eyes of the thoughts militant, illuminates them, encourages, strengthens, and leads them to victory in the contempt of every other beauty, and repudiation of every other good. Its presence, therefore, is that which enables us to overcome every difficulty and conquer every force. The intelligence, which is the truest beauty attainable by us, is not yet divinity itself, but only the highest intelligible species, or form, the highest idea. Divinity itself is the final, the most perfect object of thought and love, not attainable in our present state, in which God cannot become object to us except through some image. No image of the divine, however, even the most inadequate, can be abstracted or otherwise derived by the senses, from corporeal beauty or excellence. Such can be formed only by the intellect, and on such the human intellect feeds in this lower world, until it be allowed to behold with purer eyes the beauty of divinity itself. In a fine simile, Bruno describes how one may come to some mansion, most exquisitely adorned. And as he goes about observing now this, now that, is pleased and happy, filled with delight and noble wonder. But if then he sees the living Lord of these beautiful forms, of beauty incomparably greater, he lets go all care or thought of them, intent wholly on this one, their source. Such is the difference between the earthly state, when we see the divine beauty in intelligible or abstract forms, derived from its effects, its works, masterpieces, its shadows and similitudes, and the perfect state, when we are allowed to behold it in its real presence. The intelligible species of this conception, which Bruno derives from Neoplatonism, are simply the ideas of the speculative sciences, which include, however, what would now be called the natural sciences. Human perfection consists in a form of knowledge, a system of thought, by which the knower becomes one with the mind in which this thought system originated, the mind of God. Our knowledge, that is our perfection, can never, however, be complete, since the object, the knowable, can never be perfectly comprehended. But it may be made complete so far as our vision extends, and herein lies a saving clause for the ordinary man. Few can reach the goal, but all may run. It is enough that each do his best possible. The generous spirit prefers to fail nobly in the pursuit of the highest, rather than to succeed in inferior and baser enterprises. Action typifies the human intellect in its pursuit of the divine wisdom and capture of divine beauty. The wild beasts whom he tracks down are the intelligible species or ideal forms, rarely sought and rarely seen by those that seek them. His dogs are the thoughts that issue outwards in search of goodness, wisdom, beauty beyond himself. The fate of Action, his death under the fangs of his own hounds, represents how the generous spirit, coming into the presence of that highest beauty, is ravished out of itself, is converted into the very prey which it pursued. Itself is now the prey of its own thoughts, for it has contracted divinity into itself, has no longer to seek it outside of itself, as love converts into the thing loved. His death means that he ends his life according to the world of folly, of sense, of blindness, and of fancy, only to commence the new intellectual life, the life of the gods. The first step, however, in the desire of the infinitely beautiful is but the beginning of an endless series. The heart goes out on an endless quest, while the intellect cannot but follow. For the intellect cannot rest in any definite or finite idea or object, but is driven ever forwards towards the source of all ideas, the ocean of all truth and goodness. Whatever form may be presented to it and comprehended by it, it judges that there must be a greater above and beyond that. Hence it is in constant discourse and movement, for whatever it possesses is seen to be a measured thing, and therefore cannot be sufficient in itself, nor good in itself, nor beautiful in itself. It is not the universe, not absolute being, but being contracted to this or that nature, species, form, represented to the intellect and presented to the mind, animo. Thus always from beauty comprehended, and therefore measured or limited, the beautiful by participation, we progress towards that which is truly beautiful, beautiful without any limit or margin. On the other hand, this infinite process is not in vain, for it is not from imperfect to perfect, but a circular movement about the degrees of perfection, in order to arrive at the infinite center, which is neither formed nor form. This paradox Tancredo, taking the part of the Nolan, refuses to explain. It probably hints at the idea as familiar in Bruno as the infinite process itself, that in each form or degree of perfection, the infinite with all its perfection is wholly present. It is a center which is at the same time the circumference. In a subsequent dialogue, the object alike of intellectual pursuit and of the heart's desire is described as a positive or perfective infinite. The will cannot rest satisfied with a finite good, but if there is other good beyond, desires it, seeks it, because, as the common saying goes, the acme of one species is the foot and the beginning of the next higher species. The highest good being infinite, it is communicated infinitely, but also according to the nature of the things to which it is communicated. Neither to the universe, for example as regards mass and figure, nor to the intellect, nor to the heart, are any definite limits fixed. Yet the intellect and the heart may still become perfect through or by their object, for that object is not merely a privative infinite or potentiality, but a perfective or positive infinite, as being itself actuality and perfection. When the intellect conceives truth or light, the good, the beautiful, within the whole capacity of its nature, and the soul drinks of the divine nectar and of the source of eternal life, so much as its vessel can hold, it is seen that the light of truth extends beyond, and that the intellect may go on and on, penetrating more deeply into it. The nectar and the source of living water are infinitely productive. The soul may quench its thirst in it again and again. Thus the blessed or perfect life for Bruno meant a permanent, continuous absorption of the individual soul in the divine goodness, a permanence or eternity, which was also one with the instant of time. There was no greater value at any later moment than at the first union of the soul with its divine object. The soul was thereby removed, once for all, out of the constant flux of things, the incessant renewal and rebirth of the soul throughout the ages, and lifted up into the calm of the eternal and immutable. Even the heroic soul, however, is, as other souls, on the borderline between corporeal and incorporeal nature. In part it tends to rise towards the upper world, in part inclines towards the lower world. If sense ascends to imagination, imagination to reason, reason to intellect, intellect to mind, then the soul is wholly converted into God, and its dwelling place is the intelligible world. In the contrary direction it descends through conversion to the sensible world, by way of intellect, reason, imagination, sense, and the vegetative faculty. Mind, the highest faculty in Bruno's psychology, the intuitive perception of unity with the supreme ideal world, is oppressed by its conjunction with the more material faculties of the soul. Knowing of a higher state to which the soul might rise, it despises the present in favor of the future. If a brute had sense of the difference between its condition and that of man, and between the baseness of its state and the nobility of that of man, to which it did not feel it impossible to rise, it would prefer death which should put it on the way to that state, to life which held it fast in its present one. So the soul, compelled by its loftier thoughts, as if dead to the body, aspires upwards. Although living in the body, it vegetates there as dead, is present in it so far as animation is concerned, but absent from it in its proper action. Thus the heroic soul, although present in the body, is absent from it with the better part of itself, and unites itself in an indissoluble bond with divine things. It feels neither love nor hatred of mortal things, considering itself too great to be the slave and servant of its body. The latter it regards simply as a prison house within which its liberty is closed in, a snare that holds its wings entangled, a chain that binds its hands, fetters that hold its feet fast, a veil that bewilders its vision. Yet it is neither slave nor captive nor entangled, nor chained nor held fast, bound nor blind, for the body cannot tyrannize over it further than itself allows. It has spirit allotted to it proportionally to its nearness to divinity, since the corporeal world and matter are subject to divinity and nature. So it may make itself strong against fortune, magnanimous against injustice, bold in face of poverty, disease, and persecution. The soul of man, in Bruno's psychology as in Aristotle's, performs a double function. The one is to vivify and actuate the body, and the other to contemplate the higher world. It has a receptive faculty towards the spiritual, an active faculty towards the corporeal. Body is as dead, a thing privative towards the soul, which is its life and perfection, and the soul is as dead, a thing privative to the higher illuminating intelligence from which its intellect derives both its tendency or nature, and its actual form, its realization. The soul is not locally in the body, but is related to it as intrinsic form, and as extrinsic giver of form, moulding the members and giving shape to the composite result from within and from without. Body is in soul, soul in mind, and mind either is or is in God, as Plotinus said. The dualism of nature and divinity, of corporeal and spiritual, intellect and sense, permeates the ethical as it permeates the earlier philosophical thought of Bruno. Nowhere is the Neoplatonist effort to overcome the dualism inherent both in Plato and in Aristotle less effective than here. Thus, the body remains, in spite of the continuity seemingly maintained between the highest and the lowest of the emanations from the supreme, or the identity asserted between sense, imagination, reason, intellect, the chief hindrance to the aspiration of the soul, for the body is in continual movement, change, alteration, and its faculties are conditioned by its inherent nature, its operations by its faculties. How then can immobility, subsistence, entity, truth, be understood by that which is always different from itself, always acting and becoming in different ways? What truth, what representation can be depicted or impressed when the pupils of the eyes are dispersed into water, the water into vapor, the vapor into flame, the flame into air, that into other things and again other, the object of sense and sense knowledge passing endlessly through the infinite cycle of changes? Thought and passion take their character from their object, or the sense data on which they are based, but that which has always before it now one thing, now another, now in one way, now in another, must necessarily be quite blind in regard to that beauty which is always one, and in one manner, which is unity itself, entity, identity. Into the very life of the generous soul there enter accordingly the contrarieties by which on a lower plane the soul is governed. The skillfulness and art of nature cause it to faint with desire for that which destroys it, to be content in the midst of torment, to be tormented
that he was
in the
about
midst
6
of
feet tall, that he was completely scourged all over his body. He was crucified.
What if one of the most powerful Christian films ever made was never just a film? The Passion of Christ broke limits no Christian film ever had. But what many people don't know is that behind the scenes, this film was far from normal. Something very disturbing happened on that set, something none of us were ever supposed to know. There were whispers of a strange presence, haunting coincidences, and unnatural events that still haunt the people who worked on that set to this very day. Why did Mel Gibson insist on making a movie every studio in Hollywood refused to touch? Keep watching, because this is what happens when one man decides to cross boundaries men were never meant to. Before a single frame was filmed before the bloodied robes, and before the Passion of the Christ became a cultural phenomenon, there was one man, Mel Gibson. Not the Mel that's commonly described as a global superstar or an Oscar-winning director, but a man on a mission that almost no one understood and even fewer believed in. What many people fail to understand is the fact that this wasn't a film he planned. It was a film he just had to make. But even Mel could have never imagined what he was getting himself into. He didn't know that what would happen before, during, and after this film would lead to the most transformative experiences of his life, and in ways he never expected. Mel's obsession with the passion. It all began in the late 1990s, when Gibson was in a place most Hollywood stars would call successful. He had international fame, box office hits, and the rare privilege of calling his own shots in Hollywood. But behind the scenes, something very disturbing had begun happening to this man. He was battling some serious demons. There was addiction, depression, and a growing sense that something was missing in his life. He was on the edge, and things got so bad that he began to have inappropriate thoughts. But somewhere in that darkness, something strange happened. Mel suddenly reconnected with his faith, and it didn't happen in a soft and symbolic way. It happened deeply, and almost obsessively. According to Mel, in the midst of his pain one day, he just hit his knees on the ground and began asking God for help. From there, he began meditating on the gospel, especially parts that had to do with asking God for help, parts he had read when he was much younger. And that's where the idea behind the Passion of Christ was born. Mel once said, "I was a bad guy, a really horrible guy. My sins were the first to nail him to the cross. So I wanted to tell his story." Mel became fixated on telling the story of Jesus Christ's final hours, not as a parable or as some sanitized Hollywood epic for purely entertainment purposes, but as it really happened, in all its raw and brutal detail. And so he began pouring himself into research. He went over scripture, studied the Stations of the Cross, dug into historical texts, and even consulted mystic writings like the visions of Anne Catherine Emmerich. He wasn't interested in opinion. He wanted accuracy, realism, and authenticity. He decided that if Jesus was going to speak, he'd speak in Aramaic. If Romans were present, they'd speak Latin. There would be no English, no modernisms, absolutely nothing to soften the blow of the film. And that's exactly where the problems began. Because when Mel took the idea to multiple Hollywood studios, it immediately got shut down. Executives listened politely to his pitch about the brutal death of Jesus, spoken entirely in ancient dead languages, with subtitles and absolutely no commercial hook. And they immediately told him that no one would watch it. They refused to sponsor it or give it a dime. But Mel wasn't discouraged. He figured out that Hollywood wouldn't touch it if he didn't rework the script. But he also realized that if he compromised on the little details they wanted him to change, the entire essence of the film would be lost. And so, he did the unthinkable. Mel made the brave decision to fund the entire project himself. A whopping $30 million of his own money for the production, and another $15 million for marketing. There were no outside investors, no studio backing, and definitely no safety nets. The stakes were extremely high. If this film failed, it wouldn't just be a flop. It would be a full-blown collapse. But Mel didn't care, because at this point, this film wasn't just a business deal anymore. It was a calling. And he was about to break every rule in the book. But his next decision raised even more eyebrows. Mel decided that he didn't want the usual Hollywood stars in the movie. No famous names, no distracting faces, and definitely no A-list actors who'd pull focus from the story. He believed that the film had to feel ancient, timeless, and anonymous. So audiences wouldn't see the actors. They'd simply see Christ. And that's how Mel decided on the man whose life completely changed with this film, Jim Caviezel. Jim was a serious, devout Catholic actor who at the time was best known for supporting roles. He had the intensity Mel was looking for and the humility to take on the most demanding role imaginable. When Mel offered him the part, Jim didn't hesitate. He was ready for whatever would come his way. In fact, after offering him the role, Mel reportedly called him back and asked him not to take the role, saying, "You'll never work in this town again." But Jim responded by saying, "We all have to embrace our crosses. Jesus is as controversial now as he has ever been. Not much has changed in 2,000 years." From there, the cast took shape, and then Mel announced his extremely brave decision to have the entire film shot in Aramaic, Latin, and Hebrew with no modern translations on screen during filming. The idea was to immerse the audience and to remove any modern filter from the experience. Of course, subtitles would be added later, but Mel's hope was that even without understanding the words, viewers would understand the emotion, the betrayal, the agony, and the sacrifice. And so, language became part of the texture of the film, and the sound of it carried even more weight. The harshness of Roman Latin and the mournful cadence of Aramaic made the world of the film feel completely removed from anything modern, yet emotionally immediate. But that's not the only bold decision Mel made. Hollywood could have built a digital Jerusalem on a green screen. But he said no. Instead, he wanted real terrain, rugged mountains, cracked earth, and weather that would be real. And so the filming was done in Matera, Italy, a historic town carved into rock. Its ancient stone dwellings gave the perfect biblical look. It was eerie, raw, and untouched by modern life. But the conditions there were brutal, because the cast and crew members had to endure freezing temperatures, dangerous winds, and unpredictable storms. They built an entire crucifixion site on a hill outside the town. It was a full-scale recreation of Golgotha, with wooden crosses, dirt paths, ancient tools, and nothing fake or plastic. As pre-production turned into preparation for filming, several people, from the actors to the crew, began to feel that this project was different. Jim himself would later admit that they all knew something else was going on. Something very strange, out of the ordinary, was happening. Stories began to circulate about quiet moments of reverence on set, about people breaking into tears during rehearsals, about a kind of spiritual force. And as cameras finally began to roll, it became clear that they were not alone on that set. Strange happenings on the set. The cameras had barely begun to roll on The Passion of the Christ when the atmosphere shifted. This wasn't like any other movie set. What was supposed to be a rigorous spiritual production started turning into something else. Something that, to this day, many of the people involved still can't fully explain. And it all began with lightning. You see, when he took on the role, Jim Caviezel had automatically committed to a punishing physical performance. We're talking about full body makeup, hours on the cross, lashes, bruises, dirt, and blood. But what he and others on that set didn't expect was the sky turning against him. That's right. During one of the scenes on the hill of Golgotha, while standing on the cross, Jim was struck by a bolt of lightning. The crew froze. No one could believe it. The jolt threw him off balance, and he bit through his tongue and cheeks. According to the actor, the lightning strike eventually led to 2 heart surgeries, including an open heart surgery, along with lots of medication. Thankfully, the issue was eventually corrected years later. But what's even stranger is the fact that a few minutes after Jim was struck, lightning struck again. This
Oh my god. Hvorfor skal jeg gerne se det? Oh my fucking god. Shit. Okay.
This time, it hit the assistant director, John Michelini, who had also been struck previously on the set, and he survived once again. Twice. On the same set. Same shoot. Same location. How many times does lightning strike twice in the same place? Scientists call it rare, but those on the set started calling it something else entirely. Some said it was a sign, others said it was a warning. But that wasn't the only unnatural thing that happened on set. Reports have it that members of the crew started speaking in hushed tones about a strange presence on set. Not something visible, but something they could feel. Some others described feeling dizzy, nauseated, or suddenly emotional during filming, but only during certain moments, like the whipping, the carrying of the cross, and the death scene. Even Mel Gibson, who is known for being composed and focused, was seen walking off set during these moments. Some said he was praying, while others said he was crying. The location of the shoot, Matera, Italy, isn't known for dramatic weather, but during filming, it became strangely unpredictable. Sunny mornings would turn into blackened skies by midday, only to return to clear, windless afternoons within minutes. A scene would begin under calm skies, and halfway through, powerful gusts would slam through the set, knocking over equipment. Sandstorms would appear from nowhere, and tents would be ripped from the ground. Sometimes, just as quickly as it started, there would be silence. At some point, it began to feel less like weather challenges and more like a warning. But let's talk about Jim Caviezel, the actor who took on the role of Jesus Christ. Some say he wasn't just acting the role of Christ, he was literally enduring it. Do you know that during the scourging scene, the whips were carefully designed to miss his skin? However, during one take, the angle shifted slightly, and one of the barbs caught his back. The strike tore into his flesh, and it left a 14-inch scar. But that's not all. Later, while carrying the massive cross, Jim slipped and dislocated his shoulder. In fact, reports revealed that some screams you hear in the final cut of the film were not acting. They were real. Makeup artists would later reveal that some of the bruises appearing on his body were not makeup. They were real, and they could barely differentiate between them. Jim also contracted hypothermia during the crucifixion scenes, which were shot in cold, stormy weather. And that's not all. He had to deal with extreme stress, physical strain, and extreme exposure during filming. His body had been pushed to the edge, just like the character he was playing. And here's the eerie part. Do you realize that Jim Caviezel's initials are JC? Same as Jesus Christ's. Also, he was 30 years old during the filming, the same age Christ was at his crucifixion. Was this a coincidence? Or was it something more? But Jim wasn't the only one affected on that set. Several other cast members reportedly fell ill during or after key scenes. There were sudden fevers, sleepless nights, and nightmares. But through it all, Mel Gibson never made public statements about the supernatural events on set. But those closest to him noticed a change. He became more withdrawn and more serious. He reportedly started each day with prayer and was known to pace in the early mornings, reading the Bible under his breath. At some point, it felt like the film had become a battlefield. Not between actors and critics, but between forces far older than that. Forces of good and evil. Mel believed that The Passion of the Christ was not just a movie, but a spiritual weapon. Mel believes that what happened on that set wasn't just filmmaking. It was intense, and it was unexplainable. When The Passion of the Christ finally hit theaters on February 25th, 2004, it didn't just open like a regular movie. It detonated like a bomb. Hollywood had turned its back on Mel. Critics were sharpening their knives before the film even premiered, and some religious leaders were either preparing to defend the film or condemn it in the harshest terms imaginable. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared the world for what happened next. The controversies that followed. The release of The Passion of Christ wasn't your typical red carpet premiere with flashing lights and celebrity interviews. There was no massive press tour, no late-night talk show interviews and advertisements. Mel took a different route with the promotion of this film, and he bypassed the mainstream marketing machine altogether. Instead, he turned to the churches to help with the marketing. Evangelical leaders, Catholic priests, and Christian influencers were sent early cuts of the film. Private screenings were held not in Beverly Hills, but in church basements and conference halls across the United States. And as pastors began endorsing the film from the pulpit, hyping it up and describing it as the most powerful depiction of Jesus ever put on screen, something wild began to happen. The faith community mobilized and took the film to the next level. Church groups began booking entire theaters to watch the film, and some even arranged buses to transport their members. In fact, sermons were built around the release date. For many Christians, seeing The Passion of the Christ was not just a cinematic experience, it was a spiritual event. And just like that, Mel Gibson's controversial project exploded into one of the biggest cultural events in movie history. Analysts were stunned. The film opened on Ash Wednesday, and on that very first day, it pulled in $23.5 million. By the end of its opening weekend, it had raked in about $83.8 million, beating all expectations and becoming the biggest February debut of all time at that point. And it didn't stop there. Despite being an R-rated, subtitled, extremely violent religious film with 0 Hollywood stars, The Passion of the Christ kept drawing in crowds. By the time it left theaters, the film had grossed around $370 million in the United States alone, and over $611 million worldwide, becoming the highest-grossing R-rated movie in history at the time. This wasn't just a success, it was a phenomenon. A $30 million film, funded independently by Mel Gibson himself, had beaten the odds and defied Hollywood's rules. And the entertainment industry was left completely speechless. But with all that success came a tidal wave of criticism. Before it even premiered, The Passion of the Christ had already begun sparking outrage. Several Jewish organizations, including the Anti-Defamation League, accused the film of promoting anti-Semitic themes, specifically the age-old accusation that the Jews were solely responsible for Jesus' death. Abraham Foxman of the Anti-Defamation League said bluntly, "Our concern is that The Passion of the Christ could fuel the latent anti-Semitism that exists in the hearts of those people who hold Jews responsible for the death of Jesus, which always has been the source of Western anti-Semitism." However, Mel Gibson insisted that the film simply portrayed the events as they happened, according to Scripture. But many scholars and activists weren't buying it. And so, heated debates broke out on talk shows, tabloid pages, and even in religious circles. And yet, people still arrived in their numbers to see the movie. Another major point of contention was that the film was too brutal and was filled with graphic violence. Critics accused Gibson of enjoying the violence. The scourging scene alone, lasting nearly 10 excruciating minutes, was described as too graphic by some reviewers. Audiences reportedly fainted, vomited, or left the theater in tears. Roger Ebert, one of the few critics who tried to praise the film despite its intensity, wrote, "The movie is 126 minutes long, and I would guess that at least 100 of those minutes, maybe more, are concerned specifically and graphically with the details of the torture and death of Jesus. This is the most violent film I have ever seen." David Anson, another critic, wrote, "Instead of being moved by Christ's suffering or awed by his sacrifice, I felt abused by a filmmaker intent on punishing an audience for who knows what sins." But in the midst of all this fire, Mel Gibson stayed largely silent and decided to let the film speak for itself. Internationally, The Passion of the Christ stirred just as much passion and controversy. In Mexico, the film was embraced with fervent devotion. In Italy and Poland, Catholic audiences filled theaters night after night. In Brazil, the film played in slums and cathedrals alike. But in France and Germany, where historical sensitivities around anti-Semitism are especially sharp, the film faced strong pushback, and several theaters declined to show it altogether. In Christian circles, many hailed the film as a divine work of art. Viewers reported feeling spiritually transformed. Some even claimed physical healing or emotional breakthroughs after watching it. Churches used the film to rekindle conversations about the sacrifice of Christ. Evangelists handed out recordings as tools of conversion. For many believers, this film became the most powerful evangelistic tool since the Bible itself. But outside the church, critics, scholars, and filmmakers continued to accuse Mel of inflaming religious tensions, glorifying violence, and pushing a fundamentalist worldview. And this backlash was eventually targeted at Mel's personal life. Reporters began digging into his family history. His father's controversial statements about the Holocaust were dragged into the spotlight, and his own interviews, which were often cryptic and defensive, fueled more fire. Suddenly, The Passion of the Christ wasn't just a movie. It had become a cultural fault line. When the dust eventually settled, one thing was clear. The Passion of the Christ had changed the movie business. It had proved that there was a massive, largely untapped Christian audience that Hollywood had ignored for decades. Studios began rushing to greenlight faith-based projects. Films like God's Not Dead, Heaven is for Real, and War Room emerged in its wake. But The Passion remained the gold standard, and the one movie they all tried to imitate, but could never match. After the praise and criticism battled it out across headlines and airwaves, the lights eventually faded. The cameras stopped rolling, and the world had seen the final cut. But for the people who lived through and were actively involved in the production of The Passion of the Christ, the story didn't end when the credits rolled. If anything, it had only just begun. What happened to the actors, the crew, and even Mel Gibson himself in the months and years after the film's release was almost as dramatic and mysterious as the film itself. Some found God. Some vanished from the spotlight. Others seemed to carry invisible scars they have never spoken about. And a haunting pattern began to emerge, one that those closest to the project either couldn't or wouldn't talk about. Life after the experience. Let's start with the main character of the film, Jim Caviezel. You see, before the film, Jim was a rising talent. He starred opposite Jennifer Lopez in Angel Eyes and earned critical praise for The Thin Red Line. He has also held his own next to Dennis Quaid in Frequency, and Hollywood had him pegged as a reliable, bankable, clean-cut lead. But then, he took on the role of Jesus, and his life changed forever. After the film's massive success, you'd expect Jim's phone to be ringing off the hook. But it didn't. Roles didn't pour in. Instead, the opposite happened. His career chilled almost overnight. It turns out that some people in Hollywood reportedly labeled him as too religious, while others claimed he was too difficult. In fact, for years, sources close to the industry have whispered that perhaps Jim was quietly blacklisted. Playing Jesus and aligning so publicly with Mel Gibson had made him radioactive in certain circles. In an interview, Jim opened up, saying, "All of a sudden, I stopped being one of the 5 most popular actors in the studio, and I hadn't done anything wrong. I just played Jesus." But here's the kicker. Jim insists that he has no regrets. In fact, he has admitted that if he had to do it all over again, he would, because this film was more than just a role. It was a calling. Jim has since leaned hard into his faith, taking on Christian-themed roles and speaking at religious conferences. He's often emotional when talking about the experience and never shies away from describing it as spiritually transformative. He also began speaking boldly about his faith, especially after all the accusations and backlash he received after the film. In an interview, he once said, "I had no choice but to defend my faith at that point. I was called anti-Semitic and everything." For Mel, the release of The Passion should have been his crowning moment. He had finally proven everyone wrong. Hollywood laughed him off, and he made a global blockbuster using ancient languages and 0 stars. But while the movie soared, his personal life spiraled out of control. In the years after the film's release, his public image literally collapsed. There was the 2006 driving under the influence arrest, where he launched into an infamous drunken rant laced with anti-Semitic slurs. It was a moment that shattered his career and made him a pariah. But that wasn't all. More scandals followed after that. There were tabloid meltdowns, leaked phone calls, and accusations of inappropriate behavior. Many saw it as a complete fall from grace, but others, especially those who worked with him on The Passion, believe that there's more to the story. They say the film changed him, that in his obsessive pursuit to tell the story of Christ's suffering, something shifted inside him, and Mel himself has admitted he was never the same after making the movie. He's also hinted, in cryptic ways, that the backlash against him, both personally and professionally, wasn't entirely natural. He believes it's some sort of consequence for the extraordinary and life-changing movie he made. However, despite everything, Mel has remained unshaken in his belief that The Passion was a divine assignment. He continues to describe it as the work of his life, and in recent years, he's been quietly working on a sequel, although details have been kept tightly under wraps. But what's truly strange is that despite the success and the attention, he rarely speaks about the film anymore, and those close to him say certain chapters of that journey remain completely off-limits. But it wasn't just Mel and Jim that had strange experiences. Behind the cameras, something was happening to the crew. According to reports from those on set, several crew members had a change of heart, and some reportedly began studying the Bible during breaks. Extras, technicians, caterers, and people whose names never made it to the screen quietly shared stories of dreams, visions, or inexplicable emotions during production. Several crew members reportedly confessed their sins and asked for baptisms while filming was still ongoing. Perhaps one of the most profound ones was when Luca Lionello, a former self-proclaimed atheist who played the role of Judas, he suddenly decided to convert to Christianity after the experience he had on set. However, what's even more disturbing is how many people who were involved in the making of The Passion of the Christ still refuse to speak about it, even 2 decades later. Some actors who had only minor roles, like Roman soldiers or townspeople, have repeatedly declined interview requests. And some crew members have reportedly said they're not comfortable revisiting the experience they had. Some reports even noted that journalists who covered the production encountered a strange wall of silence when they tried to reach out to insiders. There's no scandal being covered up, no crime, just silence. However, the few who do speak often describe the filming as spiritually intense, overwhelming, or unlike anything they'd ever experienced before. But for those who won't open up, some speculate that the emotional weight of the story and the way it was filmed created a kind of sacred space that people are hesitant to disturb. Others suggest that the crew may have witnessed things that can't be explained, and they simply don't know how to talk about them. And then there are those who whisper that what happened on that set went beyond art, beyond storytelling, that it crossed into the supernatural, and everyone who was there knows it. The Passion of the Christ wasn't just a movie. For many involved, it became a spiritual marker, a before and after in their lives. Jim Caviezel paid the price with his career. Mel Gibson paid for it with his reputation. Countless others walked away from the experience changed, humbled, or haunted. And yet, none of them really regret it. They saw something. They felt something. And they know that what happened behind the scenes can't be captured in a documentary or recounted in a podcast interview. It was personal. It was sacred. And in some strange way, it may still be unfolding. And maybe that's why the silence continues, because the Passion of the Christ wasn't just a story about Jesus. For those who made it, it became their own cross to carry. But what do you think? Was the Passion of the Christ just a film or something more? Tell us in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.
No, poor.
All content. For nothing derives from principles of peace, but everything from contrary principles, through the victory and dominance of one side of the contrariety. There is no pleasure of generation on one side without the pain of corruption on the other, and the things that are becoming and those that are decaying are conjoined in one and the same composite being. The sense of joy and the sense of sorrow go ever together. It is called joy rather than sorrow if the former predominates and has greater force to solicit the sense. The life in death of the more divine soul is only an extreme instance. It is the death of lovers from an extreme of joy, the Kabbalist mors osculi, and is at the same time eternal life, such as man may have potentially in disposition in this world, but actually in effect in eternity alone. Again, it is the contrast of infinite desire and finite power, the weakness of the human mind which is intent on its divine enterprise, and suddenly is engulfed in the abyss of incomprehensible excellence. Sense and imagination are confused and absorbed. The soul can neither go forward nor backward, nor know where to turn, but loses its being just as a drop of water vanishes in the sea, or a little vapor thins out and loses its proper substance in the spacious, immeasurable air. As the height of our intelligence, so is the depth of our love or passion. The higher, that is the more comprehensive, the object of knowledge, the more absorbed become feelings and emotions in its contemplation. The most complete absorption is that of the heroic mind in its infinite and all-comprehensive object. That is not perfect divine heroic love, which feels the spur or the bridle, or regret or grief for any other love, but that which is entirely without sense or feeling of other passions. It is so deep in its delight that nothing can displease or divert it or cause it to stumble in the least, and this is to reach the highest blessedness in our present state, to have pleasure without any sense of pain. The loss of sense is caused by the absorption of the whole being in virtue, in the truly good and in felicity. Regulus, Lucretia, Socrates, Anaxarchus, Scaevola, Cocles are instanced as noble human beings who had no feeling or sense of the greatest tortures, or what would be such to baser human natures. A keener joy, or fear, or hope, faith, or indignation, or contempt turns the mind away from any present less vivid passion. One who is more deeply moved by the sight of some other thing does not suffer the pangs of death. The truly wise and virtuous man, not feeling pain, is perfectly happy, so far as the present life admits, at least in the eye of reason. In its aspiration, the soul need not go beyond itself, need only enter into the depths of its own mind, men's. For this it is unnecessary to open the eyes wide upon the heavens, to raise aloft the hands, to wend one's way to the temple, to intone to the ears of idols, that one may best be heard. Rather, we should enter into the innermost heart of ourselves, for God is near to us, within us, more truly than we are in ourselves, being soul of souls, life of lives, essence of essences. Divinity is not more nor less present in the other worlds than in our own or in ourselves. Therefore, the heroic soul withdraws from the many, neither hating them nor seeking to be like them, associating only with those whom it may make better or who may make it better, but aiming ever to be self-sufficient in its own wisdom. The soul must come to the point when it no longer regards but despises fatigue. And the more the contest of passions and vices rages within, the struggle of vicious enemies without, the more it must aspire and rise and pass, with one breath, if it may be, over this mountain of difficulty. Here there is no need for other arms or shield than the grandeur of an invincible mind, the endurance of a spirit which maintains the even tenor of its life, proceeds from knowledge, and is regulated by the art of speculating upon things high and low, divine and human, in which its highest good consists. To the love in the human soul, there corresponds love in the divine nature, because love is of the essence of divinity. It precedes in the mythology of the ancients all the other gods. Hence there is a natural instinct or tendency of all things towards the beautiful and good. Love is that by virtue of which all things are produced, which is in all things, and is the vigor of all things. By its guidance souls rise to contemplation, by the power of flight it inspires. The difficulties of nature are overcome, and men become united with God. To see God is to be seen by God. To be heard by divinity is to hear the voice of divinity. To be favored by its grace is the same thing as offering oneself to it. The divine potency that is holy in everything does not offer nor withdraw itself, except through the conversion of the other, its object, to it, or aversion from it. To love God is to be loved by God. It is only through love again that we can approach the inmost nature of God. We cannot reason or even think of the divine without detracting from it, rather than adding to its glory. To think of God is to limit him, and therefore, as we have seen, every conception of him is inadequate. The deepest, the highest knowledge of divine things is by way of negation, never by affirmation. For the divine beauty and divine goodness can never fall within our understanding, our conceptual knowledge, but are ever beyond and beyond in absolute incomprehensibility. No finite intelligence ever perceives the substance of divinity, but always its similitude, its image. Even the highest intelligences are, in the language of the schools, not formally, but only denominatively, gods or divine, divinity and the divine beauty remaining one and exalted above all things. Being itself eternal, unchangeable, the divine truth reveals itself to the few to whom it is revealed, not as in the physical sciences, which are acquired by the natural light of sense and reason, proceeding from the known to the unknown in successive stages, but suddenly and at one stroke. There is no need of expense of time, laborious study, active inquiry to secure it, but it enters into us as readily as the solar light is present, without lapse of time to him who turns to it, and lays himself open to receive it. When the soul is thus wholly turned to God, to the idea of ideas, the mind is lifted up to the unity above essence and becomes all love, all simplicity and unity. The soul is permeated at once with the desire or love of the divine beauty in itself, without similitude, figure, image or form, a desire or love which is its own realization. Giordano Bruno once wrote, "The universe is one, infinite and still, a boundless receptacle of countless forms." Let that line hum in your chest for a moment, because Bruno is not naming distant galaxies, but putting his hand on the limitless room behind your eyes. If you close those eyes now, you can almost feel the walls of ordinary thought bending outward, dancing like canvas in a rising wind. Imagine a candlelit hall that stretches across the ages, a single oak table running down its length. Plato sits at the far end, and his fingertips are glowing in the firelight. He leans forward and asks the first dangerous question: what if the shadows on the wall are lies? A silence follows, the kind of silence that makes ordinary people uneasy, but you lean in. Spinoza is next to him, calm as a glass of still water. He answers without hurry, almost in a whisper. Deus sive natura. God, or nature, is all one. Everything that exists is suspended inside a single divine substance, which means nothing can ever be outside the sacred. The sentence lands like a stone gently dropped into that water, and rings ripple all the way down the table. Then, with a thunderous voice, Nietzsche slams his palm on the wood. The candle flames flicker. "Become who you are," he screams, "because creation stays unfinished until you sign your name across the sky." He's not shouting to intimidate. He is shouting to wake the sleepers. Below the tabletop, Freud has tunneled in like a miner and surfaced among the chair legs. He wipes the dust from his spectacles, searches his pockets for his medicine, and warns that the caverns under consciousness are crowded with forgotten kings and hungry monsters. Desires you refuse to own, images you tried to bury. You can smell the damp clay on his coat, and some half-remembered dream windows in the back of your mind. Carl Jung follows the tunnel further, finds a hidden door and swings it open. A cool wind pours through. In it, you see the silhouettes of ancient gods wearing the masks of your most private emotions. Jung calls them archetypes, says they are older than language, yet speak in every language at once. He gestures toward the shapes and adds almost tenderly, "They are not here to haunt you, they are here to complete you." Finally, Giordano Bruno himself rises at the head of the table. He lifts the linen cloth with 2 fingers. Where you expected a stone floor, you see stars, spinning, infinite, silent. Bruno smiles like a man who has just returned from exile and says only, "We stand on infinity. That is the lineage you inherit tonight. So let me ask, when was the last time your bones widened at the thought of impossible possibility? When did every so-called limit crack like thin ice beneath a rising tide? Let it happen now, because what follows is not a classroom lecture. It is the blazing fire of the sun fractalized to infinity, a galaxy of galaxies of galaxies, a multiverse of multiverses of multiverses. It is impossible for words to capture the reality behind the concept of infinity. Look up and in. The Milky Way you admire is a mirror, as above so within. Each star is a neuron firing in a cosmic mind, and each flash whispers your own buried name. I invite you to break one idol tonight, because freedom often begins the instant a shadow is named. Maybe the idol is a tired certainty about who you are allowed to be, or a quiet voice that says you have come too far to change anymore. Point at it, say its name, and watch the chains fall. Because you are a mirror of infinity too, so claim your substance. From exile and says only, "We stand on infinity," the masks of your most private emotions. Jung calls them archetypes, says they are older than language, yet speak in every language at once. He gestures toward the shapes and adds almost tenderly, "They are not here to haunt you, they are here to complete you." Finally, Giordano Bruno himself rises at the head of the table. He lifts the linen cloth with 2 fingers. Where you expected a stone floor, you see stars, spinning, infinite, silent. Bruno smiles like a man who has just returned from exile and says only, "We stand on infinity. That is the lineage you inherit tonight. So let me ask, when was the last time your bones widened at the thought of impossible possibility? When did every so-called limit crack like thin ice beneath a rising tide? Let it happen now, because what follows is not a classroom lecture. It is the blazing fire of the sun fractalized to infinity, a galaxy of galaxies of galaxies, a multiverse of multiverses of multiverses. It is impossible for words to capture the reality behind the concept of infinity. Look up and in. The Milky Way you admire is a mirror, as above so within. Each star is a neuron firing in a cosmic mind, and each flash whispers your own buried name. I invite you to break one idol tonight, because freedom often begins the instant a shadow is named. Maybe the idol is a tired certainty about who you are allowed to be, or a quiet voice that says you have come too far to change anymore. Point at it, say its name, and watch the chains fall. Because you are a mirror of infinity to one idol tonight, because freedom often begins the instant a shadow is named. Maybe the idol is a tired certainty about who you are allowed to be, or a quiet voice that says you have come too far to change anymore. Point at it, say its name, and watch the chains fall. Because you are a mirror of infinity too, so claim your substance. Spinoza has already removed the velvet rope around the sacred. If nothing is outside God, then neither are you. There is no exile, only concentric rooms of belonging. Walk like it, speak like it, risk like it. Shape the world the way you want it to be. Nietzsche places a hammer in your hand, not to wreck for wrecking's sake, but to sculpt. Think of each decisive act as a chisel strike. The grain of the marble is your resistance. The statue inside is waiting for your courage to reveal its face, and your quality assurance specialist is Michelangelo. Dare the descent into the darkest corners of your mind, where your worst fears await you. It often happens that they guard your treasures. Freud and Jung agree that treasure hides in the dark. Yes, you will meet ghosts in those tunnels, but most will be younger versions of yourself waiting to be released. Bring them into the light. Gold is never found on the surface. Your branches can't reach heaven if your roots do not reach hell, Jung would point out. Now listen to your heartbeat. It is quickening, and that's good. That is the summons to step into the wide, unwalled world Bruno died to show us. Speak back to that summons. Question, challenge. Carve your initials on the doors of this unfolding dialogue of the world, whether in a private journal or the comments below, or your future book or video. I am Irevelato. I reveal the secrets you deserve to know, the lives and stories of gods and luminaries. My task is to light the torches and hand them on. Your task is to carry them further than I can see, because your role is just as important as mine. If these sparks reach you, fan them. Add your voice to the chorus. Support the work if you wish, but above all, use what you receive. Knowledge that stays idle soon turns to ash. What follows is the full spoken narration of Chapter 3, The Infinite Universe, the Mirror of God, Part 2, Philosophy of Bruno, from Giordano Bruno by J. Lewis McIntyre. Place your feet on the threshold, breathe once more, step through, and let the infinite speak. In the contemplation of the infinite, writes Bruno, man attains his highest good. All things aspire to the end for which they are ordained, and the more perfect its nature, the more nobly and effectively does each aspire. Man alone, however, as endowed with a twofold nature, pursues a twofold good. On the boundary line of eternity and time, between the archetypal world and the copy, the intelligible and the sensible, participating in either substance. Human effort can find satisfaction in none but the highest and first truth and goodness. Neither our intellect nor our will ever rests. It is clear, therefore, that their end lies not in particular goods or truths which lead us on from one to another and to another, but in universal good and truth, outside of and beyond which no good or truth exists. So long as we believe that any truth is left to know or any good to gain, we seek always further truth, desire always further good. The end of our inquiry